The smell of burnt coffee hit my nose the same instant the boiling liquid hit my skin, searing through the thin fabric of my dress and clinging to me like fire. I gasped, clutching my stomach, my unborn child shifting inside as though jolted awake by the violence of it, and for a heartbeat the world slowed, every eye in the room locked on me. Balloons swayed gently above the table cupcakes with pink and blue frosting sat untouched, and yet in the middle of what was supposed to be a celebration of new life, my sister Marissa had turned it into a battlefield. She stood with the empty mug dangling from her fingers, her chest heaving as if she had just proven a point rather than committed an assault. Pain spread across my chest, sharp and unforgiving, but the silence that followed cut even deeper. No one moved. Not my father, who frowned at the stain spreading across the carpet instead of at my blistering skin. Not my mother, who rushed forward not to help me but to shield Marissa, pulling her close and whispering. She didn't mean it as though I had imagined the scalding heat that now burned like knives against my body. Guests shifted in their chairs, eyes dropping, mouths pressed shut, unwilling to disturb the fragile illusion of family harmony. The betrayal pressed heavier than the pain, a crushing weight in my chest that left me trembling. I wanted someone to shout, to cry out that this was wrong, but the only sound was the faint drip of coffee sliding off the hem of my dress onto the hardwood floor. In that suffocating silence, I understood what I had always known but never wanted to face. I was not the daughter they would protect. I was the problem they would contain, the inconvenience they would silence, the selfish one they would accuse if I dared to speak. Rage clawed at my throat, fear knotted in my stomach, and yet beneath it all, a cold clarity rose. They thought I was powerless, cornered, broken, but I had come prepared. I was 30 years old and pregnant with my first child, a child I had fought for through years of doubt and sacrifice. And yet, I still felt like the unwanted daughter in a family that never missed a chance to remind me of my place. My sister Marissa was 4 years older and carried the golden halo our parents had placed on her since childhood. To them, she was brilliant, even when she stumbled, fragile, even when she was cruel, deserving, even when she squandered every opportunity handed to her. I, Rachel, had been the one expected to stand tall, to work extra shifts, to make do with less. So Marissa could always have more. Our mother Linda spoke often about how Marissa had such potential, if only the world would stop being unfair to her, while our father Robert remained mostly silent, using his control of money as the language of power, paying bills or withholding funds, depending on whether we obeyed the family script. When I was 8, Marissa shoved me down the stairs during an argument over a toy, and I wore the scar on my knee for months. But our parents called it an accident, their eyes already sliding past me to where Marissa pouted prettily. In high school, she maxed out a credit card, and Linda convinced me to hand over the savings from my part-time job to cover it, saying, "That is what sisters are for." In college, when I asked for help with rent, Robert said no, reminding me that Marissa needed support more because she was struggling. Those patterns shaped my life. Carving grooves so deep, I often felt like a character playing the same role in a story I never agreed to. When I met David, the man who would become the father of my child, my parents dismissed him as too ordinary, too unpolished, but I found in him something they never offered: quiet steadiness, belief in me without conditions. We planned for years to have a baby, and when the test finally showed 2 lines, I cried with a joy that felt private and sacred. Yet instead of celebration, my family saw opportunity. Linda began arriving uninvited, stocking my fridge with foods I never asked for, rearranging the nursery I had barely started. Marissa suggested moving in to help once the baby arrived, her tone sugary, but her eyes calculating, as though my home were hers to claim. When I pushed back gently, Robert said, "You will need help, Rachel. Do not be difficult." Their words carried the familiar warning. Difficult meant selfish. Difficult meant disloyal. Difficult meant ungrateful. I should have recognized the baby shower was never meant to be about me. The decorations were curated by Linda, the guest list padded with her friends, the cake ordered to Marissa's favorite flavor rather than mine. 3 days before the event, I had found boxes stacked in the garage labeled Marissa's clothes and Marissa's books. And when I asked her, she laughed and said, "Just temporary storage until I find more space." I wanted to believe her, but the knot in my chest tightened. A week earlier, while waiting in the kitchen, I overheard Linda on the phone with Aunt Sarah saying, "It is perfect timing. Rachel will need company in that big house, and Marissa will be right there for the baby." The way she said it, as if my child belonged to the family at large rather than to me, made me grip the counter until my knuckles turned white. What they did not know was that beneath my polite silence, I was already gathering proof. Years of text messages where Linda dismissed my needs receipts, where Robert bailed out Marissa, yet called me reckless for buying a new coat. Even a screenshot of a Pinterest board labeled Nursery for Marissa's Baby, where Linda and Marissa had planned colors and furniture for the room they assumed would be theirs. Each piece went into a folder I kept hidden, a fortress of facts to defend against the narrative they always spun that I was unstable, selfish, or cruel. I had learned the hard way that in my family, truth alone was never enough. It had to be documented, organized, undeniable. On the morning of the shower, I hesitated by my dresser, staring at the manila envelope filled with copies of those documents. Should I bring it? Was it too paranoid? Too dramatic? But something inside me whispered that no matter how pretty the balloons, no matter how sweet the frosting today was not a celebration, but an ambush. I slipped the envelope into my purse, my hands trembling, and told myself it was only a precaution. Deep down, I knew better. Deep down, I knew my family never gathered without an agenda, and that agenda never placed me at the center unless it was to strip me of something I loved. So, when the coffee burned across my skin and silence fell heavier than the pain, I was not only the victim they expected me to be, I was also the witness to my own history, the keeper of evidence, the woman they had underestimated for too long. And though every part of me shook with fear and fury, a single thought steadied me. If they wanted a battle, then today they would finally learn I was ready. Marissa's shrill voice shattered the frozen silence as she dropped the empty mug onto the floor and clutched at our mother's arm, tears spilling instantly down her cheeks as if she had rehearsed them. She pushed me to it. She sobbed, her gaze darting toward me, accusing, pleading, manipulative all at once. "Rachel makes me feel like a failure. She always makes me lose control." Linda pressed her lips together and rubbed Marissa's back soothingly, turning to the room with an expression of weary authority, as if she had once again been called upon to manage my selfishness. "Please, everyone, calm down. It was just stress. Rachel should know her sister is under a lot of pressure." I stood with my dress clinging wet against my skin, the hot sting on my chest radiating upward into my throat, but the burn of betrayal was worse. Robert finally spoke, his deep voice steady but cold. "Family helps family, Rachel. Do not make this bigger than it is." His eyes met mine briefly before sliding away as though I were a stranger. My hands shook, one pressed instinctively over my belly, the other reaching for a napkin someone half-heartedly extended without meeting my eyes. Around the table, cousins and aunts shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. The air was heavy with an unspoken script we all knew too well. Marissa errs. Rachel absorbs the blame, Linda and Robert dictate the narrative, and the family nods along. Marissa's tears turned to anger in an instant, her voice rising higher. "You have never wanted me around. You treat me like poison. Maybe if you cared more, I would not act like this." She reached toward me as if to embrace me, but Linda held her back, whispering, "Not now, sweetheart. You need space." Then she shot me a look sharp enough to cut. "Rachel, your sister is trying. Stop glaring like that. It only makes things worse." A laugh bubbled up in my throat, bitter and shaky. I wanted to scream, to shout the truth, but I remembered too well how that story always ended. My raised voice would be called hysteria, my anger painted as cruelty. Already I could hear the labels circling like vultures. Difficult, selfish, unstable. Each word a chain designed to hold me down. Robert stepped forward, his presence heavy, his voice a command. "Enough, Rachel. You are pregnant. You cannot afford to be reckless. You will need your sister once the baby is here. Family sticks together." His words carried the weight of threat, not comfort. I knew exactly what he meant. Refuse, and I would be cut off from his carefully rationed financial help, the insurance payments he always lorded over me. Linda added softly, but with steel beneath. "I worry about you, darling. These impulsive reactions are not like you. Are you taking care of yourself properly?" Maybe you should talk to someone. The familiar tactic. If I did not comply, perhaps I was unstable, unfit, a mother incapable of caring for her child. A murmur of agreement circled the table, heads nodding slightly, eyes downcast at the family, tightening the noose of consensus. I looked at them, my chest still burning, my heart pounding, and I saw not love, but a tribunal passing judgment. Every breath I took felt heavy with the knowledge that once again they had cast me as the villain, the ungrateful daughter, the threat to harmony. Marissa sniffled dramatically and pressed her head into Linda's shoulder, whispering, "She hates me. She always has. She wants me gone forever." And Linda stroked her hair, glaring at me as if I were a monster for wounding her precious child. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in voices blending into a suffocating chorus that erased my pain, erased the coffee burns, erased me. Yet beneath the crushing weight of gaslighting, a new steadiness grew. I tasted iron on my tongue from biting back words, but my silence was not submission. It was strategy. They thought they were cornering me again, rewriting the script as they always had, but they did not know what I carried in my purse. They did not know the folder full of proof, the receipts, the messages, the evidence of every twisted lie. They did not know that I was no longer the girl who swallowed blame until it poisoned her. I was a woman who had learned that survival sometimes meant waiting, watching, letting your opponent believe you are beaten before you strike. As Robert lifted his glass and said gravely, "To family, to unity," and others half-heartedly echoed the toast I raised. Nothing. My hand pressed firmly over the life inside me, silently promising my child that this cycle would end here. My pulse steadied. I could endure their gaslighting a little longer, because soon, very soon, I would break the script. As the evening dragged forward with forced laughter and brittle small talk, I sat quietly feeling the burn on my skin cool into a sticky ache beneath the fabric of my dress and let them believe I was shrinking. That was what they expected of me, that I would fold in on myself and accept their version of events. But while Marissa soaked up whispered comfort from Linda and Robert watched me like a judge measuring disobedience, I turned inward to the fortress I had built long before tonight. I had lived 30 years in this family, and 30 years had taught me that truth was not enough. They rewrote truth with every word, every sigh, every knowing glance that made me small, and Marissa their star. If I wanted to stand, I needed proof, and so for years I had gathered it in silence. It started with receipts, the ones I found crumpled in the trash, after Marissa had once again overspent receipts for new clothes and jewelry bought with money she claimed not to have later covered by my parents, who called it compassion. I copied the amount-saved statements, built a trail. Then came the text messages, Linda sending me notes late at night about how family helps each other with demands for cash or assistance, while always cushioning Marissa with excuses. I screenshotted them all, stored them carefully, backed them up to an external drive that no one knew existed. The deeper my family leaned into their story of me as selfish, the more determined I became to build my counter-narrative. I documented everything, the times Robert told me he would not help with my rent, but then bragged at dinner about paying off Marissa's car, the conversations where Linda dismissed my exhaustion from working double shifts, yet cooed about Marissa being too delicate for stress, the whispered phone calls I overheard, where they plotted to smooth over Marissa's latest mistake while framing me as difficult. Even the smallest details, a note scribbled on a calendar about moving Marissa's belongings into my garage, or a half-finished list of baby items in Linda's handwriting labeled for Marissa's nursery, went into the envelope. When I discovered the Pinterest board one morning, labeled boldly "Nursery for Marissa's Baby," filled with pastel themes and furniture ideas, I sat in my kitchen shaking with rage. There was no accident in those choices, no misunderstanding. It was a declaration that they intended to take what was mine to rewrite even the identity of my unborn child as belonging to Marissa. I printed every screenshot, cataloged each date. By the time my baby shower approached, my folder had grown thick with evidence of a lifetime of theft, not of money alone, but of dignity, of recognition, of space to live as myself. On the morning of the shower, I stood before my dresser staring at the envelope thick and weighty in my hands. I hesitated, my reflection pale and weary in the mirror. Was I paranoid for thinking I might need it? Was I foolish to believe that today of all days could become another battlefield? For a moment, I wanted to leave it behind, to walk into the celebration unburdened, to pretend I had a normal family waiting with love. But I could not ignore the memory of overhearing Linda telling Aunt Sarah that this was perfect timing, that I was lonely in that big house, and Marissa could finally move in. I could not forget the boxes stacked in the garage already labeled with Marissa's things. My pulse quickened and I slid the envelope into my purse, telling myself it was only for reassurance. Deep down, I knew better. I had lived too long in this family to believe in happy surprises. During the shower, I stayed quiet, watching my silence, not weakness, but a shield. I cataloged every look, every whispered phrase, every time Linda redirected sympathy toward Marissa. I noted how Robert raised his glass and ignored the stain on my dress, how cousins turned away rather than acknowledge the violence. Each detail became another entry in the mental log. I kept the story I would one day present in full. They thought I was shrinking, but really I was gathering, adding tonight to the ledger of proof that I was not crazy, not cruel, not unstable, but trapped in a system designed to erase me. Even in my marriage to David, I had learned the power of documentation. When our roof collapsed 2 years ago and the insurance company tried to deny coverage, it was my careful records photos of the damage emails filed chronologically that won us the settlement. I had carried that same discipline into this war, though the battlefield was my family rather than an insurance company. Tonight, as I pressed my hand against the purse at my side, feeling the envelope within, I understood that survival was not about shouting the loudest, but about having the undeniable proof when the time came to strike. The baby inside me shifted a small reminder of what was at stake. This was not just about me anymore. This was about breaking the cycle so my child would not grow up believing love meant erasure or loyalty meant silence. It was about showing that I could stand even if no one stood with me. The burns on my skin throbbed, the ache mingling with fury, but beneath it all was a strange calm. I had prepared for this, and though the timing was brutal, maybe fate had decided that today would be the day the truth could no longer be hidden. As Marissa laughed loudly at some whispered comment from Linda, her voice sharp with victory, I let my gaze rest on her and felt the weight of the envelope steady me. She thought she had humiliated me, that her violence would be washed away by our parents' excuses and the family's silence. But she did not know what I carried. She did not know that the years of gaslighting had taught me to keep receipts, to build walls of evidence that could not be denied. Tonight, she had crossed a line visible to everyone, and I would not waste the opportunity. For too long, I had been the daughter who endured. Tonight, I would be the daughter who fought back. The murmur of voices was still circling the room when a figure stepped forward from the back, a figure I had almost forgotten was there in the haze of betrayal and pain. Dr. Howard, my obstetrician, had come at my invitation, a quiet presence meant to reassure me through what should have been a joyful day. He was tall, composed, his silver hair catching the light as he raised a hand for silence. The chatter died quickly, replaced by the kind of hush that falls when authority enters the room. He did not look at Marissa nor at my parents, but at me, his gaze steady, clinical, and kind. "Rachel," he said gently, "we need to check you immediately." The firmness of his tone cut through my fog. Before I could protest, he was at my side, guiding me to a chair, asking questions with a precision that made the room shrink around us. Had the liquid touched my stomach directly? Did I feel cramping? Was the baby moving normally? I answered in shaky whispers, my hand never leaving the curve of my belly. He pressed lightly against my abdomen, his eyes narrowing, then relaxed slightly. "The baby is still moving," he said aloud, his words aimed at the crowd as much as at me. "But this kind of trauma is serious. And the marks on her skin are not the only concern." He looked around, letting his words sink in. "This is not the first time I have seen signs of harm on Rachel's body." A ripple of shock moved through the guests. My mother stiffened her hand, gripping Marissa's shoulder. "That is ridiculous!" Linda snapped, her voice shrill. "She bruises easily. She is clumsy." But Dr. Howard did not waver. He spoke slowly, deliberately, like a man accustomed to courts and reports. "For months, I have noted injuries inconsistent with accidents. Finger marks on her wrists, faint bruising around her neck, patterns of stress that suggest ongoing intimidation. I have given her chances to disclose, but now there is no choice. As a physician, I am mandated to report suspected abuse, especially when a pregnancy is endangered. His words fell like stones in the silence, each one crashing into the fragile facade of family unity my parents had built. Marissa gasped dramatically, tears streaming again. "He is lying." "She made him say that. She wants to ruin me." Linda rushed to cover her, glaring at me as if I had orchestrated the entire scene. "Rachel, how could you?" she hissed, "dragging your doctor into our private matters, humiliating us in front of everyone." Robert's face was flushed, his fists clenched, but even he seemed rattled as Dr. Howard reached into his briefcase and produced a small notepad. "I will be filing a full report with Child Protective Services and local law enforcement," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "This child's safety is non-negotiable. Everyone here is now a witness to what happened." He gestured toward the mug shards still glinting on the hardwood floor, the stain on my dress, the redness blooming across my skin. This was not stress. This was assault. The word hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Assault. For years, my family had twisted language to suit their story. Now someone outside had named it, stamped it with authority. I felt my lungs expand as if I had been holding my breath for decades. Marissa shook her head violently. "You cannot do this. You cannot call it that." But no one rushed to echo her this time. Some of the cousins looked at each other, uncertain, shifting in their seats. Aunt Dorothy cleared her throat softly, her eyes meeting mine with something like recognition, maybe even relief. For once, someone had said aloud what she had long suspected. Robert tried to recover his voice, booming in the small room. "Doctor, surely you are overreacting. Families have disagreements, things get heated, but we work them out privately. Rachel does not need interference." But Dr. Howard was unmoved. "A woman burned with hot liquid in her third trimester is not a private disagreement. A child at risk is not a family quarrel. This is a matter of health, safety, and law." His eyes swept the room, catching every witness in their uncomfortable silence. "And I will not allow it to be buried under excuses." The ground shifted beneath me in that moment. For years, I had lived in a world where my pain was minimized, where every protest was met with accusations of selfishness. Now, someone with authority had stood up and declared it real, declared it unacceptable. My throat tightened, tears stinging my eyes, but this time they were not tears of helplessness. They were the tears of recognition, of finally being seen. The guests murmured again, but the tone was different now, less certain, tinged with unease. I could feel the balance beginning to tilt. Marissa lunged toward me, her hands outstretched as if to clutch at my arm, but Dr. Howard stepped between us, his voice firm. "Do not touch her." The command froze her mid-step. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear, not the practiced vulnerability she wielded like a weapon. She glanced at Linda for reassurance, but even Linda's lips trembled, her certainty cracking. "Rachel," my mother pleaded, her voice thin, "say something. Tell him you are fine. Tell him this is a misunderstanding." I opened my mouth, my voice shaking but clear. "I am not fine, and this is not a misunderstanding." Gasps erupted around the room. For once, I had not swallowed the words. For once, I had refused the script. The heat from the coffee still throbbed against my skin, but beneath it a new fire burned, one that would not be doused by excuses. I looked at my parents, at Marissa, at the stunned faces of my relatives, and I thought, the silence is over. The silence that followed my words felt electric, a hum in the air that pressed against every chest in the room. For a moment, no one seemed to breathe. Then the dam broke. Linda's voice rose first sharp with desperation. "You do not know what you are saying, Rachel. You are tired, you are overwhelmed. You should sit down and stop letting outsiders twist things." She looked at Dr. Howard as though sheer contempt could erase his authority. Robert stepped closer, his face red with fury. "You are making a scene. Families do not air their struggles in front of strangers." But his words trembled at the edges, and I saw in his eyes the flicker of something I had never witnessed before, the recognition that their control was slipping. Marissa clung to Linda, her voice cracking. "She is trying to ruin me. She always ruins everything." I stood my knees weak, but my back straight, and reached into my purse. The envelope slid out, thick and weighty, and for the first time in my life, I felt its power in my hands. I placed it on the table, my fingers lingering on the edge. "You say I am unstable, selfish, ungrateful. You say this was a misunderstanding. Let us see what misunderstanding looks like." I opened the flap and began pulling out sheets of paper, laying them one by one on the table. The first was a stack of receipts Robert's handwriting marking payments made on Marissa's behalf. "These are the car payments you covered while telling me to take the bus during my pregnancy. These are the credit card bills you paid while telling me to grow up and manage my own problems." Robert's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, but he said nothing. Next came the screenshots messages from Linda, her words glowing cruelly from the page. "Rachel, you need to give your sister the money. That is what family does." Another. "Stop being difficult. Marissa needs support, and you are selfish for withholding it." Murmurs rose around the table as cousins leaned closer to read. Linda reached forward as if to snatch the papers, but stopped when Dr. Howard's steady gaze met hers. I pulled out the printed images of the Pinterest board, the pastel colors, the crib and rocking chair, the label written in bold letters across the top nursery for Marissa's baby. Gasps filled the room, sharp intakes of breath that cut through the heavy air. I turned my phone screen toward them, showing the date, the usernames, the evidence undeniable. Marissa shrieked, "That was just for fun. We were only playing around." But Aunt Dorothy, sitting quietly at the end of the table, finally raised her voice. "No, it was not for fun. We have all seen how you treat Rachel. We have all watched you take and take while she is told to be quiet." Her words were soft, but carried weight, and several heads turned toward her, eyes wide. For once, I was not alone in the fight. I laid down the last piece, a log of bruises photographs I had taken of my own wrists. Faint marks, shaped like fingers, the bruises around my neck from nights when arguments had turned into something darker. My voice wavered but held steady. "These are not accidents. These are not misunderstandings. These are the scars of being silenced." The room fell so quiet I could hear the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Dr. Howard spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "What you are looking at is a documented history of coercion and abuse. This is no longer a family issue, it is a matter of law." Robert slammed his hand against the table, making the glasses rattle. "You can cancel the sale, Rachel. You can take back these accusations. You think you can stand against us, but you need me. Who pays the property taxes? Who helps when the bills pile up?" His words rang with threat, but his authority was crumbling. "Not anymore," I said, gathering the papers into neat stacks. "I have carried this burden alone long enough. You taught me that family helps family, but what you meant was I must always bleed so Marissa can thrive. That is not help. That is abuse." Marissa lunged again, her face twisted with fury. "You did this on purpose. You sold your house. You plotted against me just to spite me. You are evil, Rachel." Her voice cracked into a wail, but the room did not rally to her this time. Eyes turned away, mouths pressed thin, the silence damning. Uncle Robert, who had sat quiet until now, leaned forward. "Marissa, what is your job right now?" "Last I heard you were still unemployed," Marissa stammered. "I am between opportunities." "The market is tough." Linda jumped in, her voice sharp. "This is not about jobs. This is about family duty." Rachel always had more she should share, but Dorothy interrupted again, louder this time. "More. Rachel worked for everything she has. She never asked you for a cent, and I have watched you drain her while calling her selfish." "Enough!" The shift was palpable. For years, I had been the only voice crying out against the injustice drowned by the chorus of my parents' authority. Now others were speaking, cracks spreading through the facade. Barbara, my financial advisor, who had come as a guest, cleared her throat. "I can confirm that enabling financial dependency harms both parties. I have seen Rachel sacrifice her stability for years. It is unsustainable and destructive." Thomas, a friend, leaned forward from his chair. My brother lived off my parents until their deaths. He lost everything within a year because he never learned. Sometimes love means saying no. Their voices joined mine, building a chorus that overpowered the old script. Linda looked around wildly, her face pale. You are all against us now. Against me, against Marissa, Robert muttered. This is ridiculous. But his voice lacked conviction. Marissa slammed her hands against the table. I am not a parasite. She is the golden one. Not me. She always had everything. But her words rang hollow. The evidence lay spread across the table, undeniable, heavy with truth. I felt a strength rise in me I had never known. You taught me to keep quiet, to absorb the blame, to believe I was selfish for needing space. But today, I am finished with silence. This is my life. My child and I will not hand them over to you. My voice shook, but carried echoing through the stunned room. Dorothy's hand reached out, squeezing mine gently. Good for you, she whispered, and in that moment the validation I had longed for my entire life finally arrived. The confrontation stretched on, voices rising and falling, but the tide had turned. My parents sat rigid, their power draining Marissa, trembling with rage. The room no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the truth laid bare for everyone to see. And as I gathered the papers back into the envelope, my hands no longer trembled. For the first time, I stood not as their difficult daughter, not as their scapegoat, but as a woman who had claimed her own story. The knock on the door came like a final drumbeat, sharp and commanding, silencing even Marissa's shrill protests. When two uniformed officers stepped inside, summoned by Dr. Howard's earlier call, the atmosphere shifted from argument to reckoning. The room that had always belonged to my parents now belonged to the law. One officer spoke calmly, asking for details while the other surveyed the scene, noting the shattered mug on the floor, the burn on my dress, the redness across my chest. Dr. Howard stepped forward with the authority of his profession, explaining what had transpired. His voice steady, clinical, irrefutable. Linda rushed toward the officers, her words tumbling in frantic defense. It was an accident. My daughter did not mean it. She was under stress. You cannot treat family matters like crimes. But the officer held up a hand. Ma'am, throwing hot liquid at a pregnant woman is assault. This is not a family matter. It is a criminal matter. Marissa's face drained of color. You cannot arrest me. You cannot do this, she stammered. But when the officer reached for her wrists and snapped the cuffs around them, the clink of metal rang like justice. Gasps echoed. A child began to cry, and for the first time I saw Marissa. Not as the untouchable golden child, but as a frightened woman facing consequences she had never imagined. Linda screamed, clutching at her as though she could pull her back from accountability, but the officer guided her firmly toward the door. Stop this! Robert bellowed, his voice cracking. You are humiliating our family. Yet humiliation was a small price compared to the decades of silence they had demanded from me. I sat frozen, one hand on my belly, watching the scene with a mixture of disbelief and release. My heart pounded, my skin stung, but the weight pressing on me for years had begun to lift. Relatives whispered, some hiding their faces, others staring openly as Marissa was led out, her sobs echoing down the hall. Linda turned on me, her face twisted with fury. Are you happy now, Rachel? You have destroyed us. You have betrayed your sister, your parents, your blood. Robert's voice joined hers, low and hard. You will regret this. You think the world will stand with you, but family is forever. Without us, you are nothing. Their words landed as they always had, heavy with accusation, but this time they did not bury me. Because as they spoke, Aunt Dorothy stepped forward, her hand firm on my shoulder. No, Linda. What destroyed this family is the years of favoritism, the years of abuse, the years of calling cruelty love. Rachel is not the problem. You are. The room rippled with shock. Never before had anyone spoken against my parents so directly. Cousins who had been silent now nodded subtly, their eyes flicking between me and Dorothy. Dr. Howard added, The state will investigate now. This is beyond denial. The child's safety must come first." The words struck like gongs reverberating with authority. I exhaled a sound almost like a sob and realized I had been holding my breath since the moment the coffee hit my skin. For once, the law witnesses, even parts of my family, stood with me. I was not alone. The officers left with Marissa, the door closing behind them like a seal on a chapter that had ruled my life for decades. The aftermath was a mess of broken voices and stunned silence. Linda collapsed into a chair, shaking her eyes darting between relatives as if searching for someone to rescue her pride. Robert stood, rigid arms crossed his face, a mask of stone, but I saw the cracks in his composure. His control was gone, the narrative broken. The guests murmured, some excused themselves quickly, others lingered awkwardly, caught between loyalty and truth. I rose slowly, every movement heavy, but with a steadiness that surprised me. "You told me I would regret speaking up, but I do not. I regret every year I kept quiet." My voice carried across the stunned room. Robert glared, but his silence was louder than any denial. Linda wept quietly, muttering about betrayal, but her words no longer pierced me. The cycle had fractured. The fortress of silence had fallen. Later at the hospital, nurses tended my burns, their voices kind, gentle, without judgment. They asked if I felt safe at home, and for the first time I said no without hesitation. Dr. Howard stayed until he was certain the baby was stable, then pressed my hand firmly. "You did the right thing, Rachel. You and your child will be safer now." His words settled into me like a benediction. That night alone in the sterile quiet of the hospital room, I stared at the ceiling and felt both hollow and whole. I had lost the family I thought I had, but perhaps I had never truly possessed it. What I gained was something harder, stronger, more precious, the chance to build a life where silence would never again be the price of belonging. In the days that followed, I found myself drifting between numbness and waves of emotion that crashed without warning, as if the confrontation had ripped open a dam I had kept sealed for years. Alone in the hospital room, I traced the edge of the burn on my skin, feeling the sting, not just of scalded flesh, but of every slight, every silence, every moment I had been told my pain was too inconvenient to name. Memories flooded back with cruel clarity. I remembered the time when I was 12 and Marissa tore my favorite dress in half, then stood crying in front of our parents, insisting I had ruined it. I remembered Linda scolding me for selfishness when I begged for space during college exams, only to discover she had used my room to store Marissa's boxes. I remembered Robert's dismissive glance when I asked for help with tuition, the way he said, "Your sister needs it more." Each memory was another scar, invisible yet deep, and now lying under the dim hospital light, I finally let myself admit how much they had shaped me into someone who believed silence was safer than truth. But even as grief hollowed me, another current began to move beneath it. For the first time in my life, I had spoken in front of them all and refused to retract my words. I had not cowered, I had not apologized, and the world had not ended. In fact, something else had ended the spell of their control. My parents' threats had always held power because I feared isolation, feared being cast out. Yet sitting alone with my unborn child's steady kicks beneath my hand, I realized I was already living that isolation, carrying it every day in their house, their words, their gaze. What I had gained was not loneliness, but release. There were nights when doubt crept in, whispering cruelly. Was I heartless to let my sister be arrested, to let my parents drown in public shame? Was I truly the destroyer they painted me to be? The questions gnawed at me, familiar as breath, but this time I countered them with the truth I had seen in the eyes of others that night. Dorothy's quiet validation, Barbara's firm testimony, Thomas's story, even the uneasy silence of cousins who did not leap to defend my parents. All of it told me the pattern had been visible, that I had not imagined it. For once, my reality was not erased. For once, others had witnessed it and called it by its name. In the stillness of those hospital hours, I also thought of my child, the life within me, who had already been dragged into the fire of family conflict. I pressed a hand against my stomach and whispered promises I had never dared to speak aloud. You will not grow up believing love means erasure. You will not carry the weight of another's chaos as your duty. You will not be silenced into disappearing. My voice cracked, but I kept whispering over and over until the words felt like prayer, like armor, like truth. The reflection was not easy and it was not clean. Some mornings I woke with a heaviness so profound I could barely rise grief for the family I had wanted for parents who could have chosen differently. But alongside that grief was something new, a thread of strength woven through the cracks. Perhaps healing was not about erasing the past, but about claiming its scars and all as proof that I had survived and would never again be silenced. The weeks that followed brought changes I once believed impossible. Marissa was formally charged, her face appearing in local papers, not as the adored golden child, but as a defendant in a case of assault. For the first time in our family's long history of denial, her actions carried consequences that could not be hidden beneath excuses or whispered away as misunderstandings. Linda tried to rally relatives to her side, insisting that outsiders had twisted the truth, but the evidence I had laid bare could not be erased. Some cousins stopped returning her calls, others quietly reached out to me with words of support, their voices cautious but sincere. The old story had cracked, and no amount of denial could piece it together again. The sale of my house closed smoothly, money transferring into an account in my name, alone untouchable by anyone else's demands. I moved into a modest apartment near the hospital. Not glamorous, but mine, every corner echoing with the freedom of choice. Each decision about furniture, about colors, about where to place the crib felt like reclaiming years of stolen autonomy. When I signed the lease, I thought of my parents' words. Without us, you are nothing, and felt only quiet defiance. Without them, I was finally becoming something. The justice system moved slowly, but even its pace brought a sense of closure. When the court issued a restraining order against Marissa, Linda's outraged voice echoed through the hallways, yet she could not undo it. Robert glared at me outside the courtroom, his face lined with disbelief, but he did not speak. He could no longer command me with silence. The law had given shape to the boundaries I had tried for years to draw. Small acts of justice unfolded in other ways, too. Aunt Dorothy began inviting me to family gatherings without Linda's oversight, her quiet presence a steady reminder that not every relative had turned their back. At work, colleagues who had heard rumors treated me with unexpected respect, one even confiding that she admired my courage. For the first time, I felt seen beyond the narrow lens of scapegoat my story acknowledged in the light, rather than hidden in the shadows. Change did not erase pain, but justice stitched it into something livable, a fabric strong enough to carry me forward. The day I finally brought my baby home was quiet without the noise of family expectations or the chaos of false celebrations. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and new fabric, the crib waiting by the window where soft light spilled across the floor. As I laid my daughter down, her tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with life's simple promise, I felt a calm I had never known in the house I grew up in. No voices shouted over me. No hands tried to rewrite my truth. No sister hovered waiting to strike. It was just us, mother and child, and the silence was no longer heavy but holy. I thought of Marissa sometimes, of Linda and Robert, of their words like chains that once bound me. There was grief in knowing they would never be the family I had needed, that they had chosen cruelty over compassion, control over love. But grief no longer defined me. It passed through me like a storm whose violence had already spent itself, leaving behind clearer skies. I realized that justice was not just in the courtroom or in the handcuffs on my sister's wrists. Justice was in each breath I took freely, each choice I made without fear, each moment I offered my daughter a world shaped not by silence but by truth. At night, I would hold her close and whisper the vow I had carried since the hospital. You will not inherit the chains I carried. You will not mistake violence for love or silence for loyalty. You will know your worth, and so will I. And as her tiny fingers curled around mine, I felt strength surge through me, not loud, not public, but steady, unshakable enough to carry us forward into a life of our own making.